Dr. Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the cool metal surface of the observation deck's railing, watching the sun through the station's specialized filters. At $0.20 from Earthstar, the Helios research station was humanity's closest permanent outpost to the solar furnace that gave life to their world. But today, that furnace held secrets that challenged everything they thought they knew about reality itself. "Show me the readings again, Marcus," she said, not turning from the viewport. Dr. Marcus Chin's fingers danced across the holographic interface, bringing up a three-dimensional model of the sun's interior. The familiar layers appeared: the core, radiative zone, convection zone, but there, nestled deep within the nuclear heart of the star, was something that shouldn't exist. "The gravitational anomaly appeared 3 weeks ago," Marcus explained, his voice tight with barely contained excitement. "At first, we thought it was a computational error, but every sensor confirms it. There's a void in the sun's core, a perfect sphere, roughly 50 kilometers in diameter, where our models say there should be plasma at 15 million degrees Celsius." Elena finally turned from the viewport, her dark eyes reflecting the station's ambient lighting. "And the spectral analysis? That's where it gets impossible," Dr. Sarah Kim interjected from her workstation. The young quantum physicist had been running calculations for 72 hours straight, surviving on caffeine and sheer determination. "The electromagnetic signatures coming from that void don't match anything in our databases. The wavelengths, they're folded, Elena. Folded through dimensions we can't even properly map. The implications hung in the air like a charged particle waiting to discharge." Elena had spent 20 years studying stellar physics, had authored papers on nuclear fusion dynamics and magnetic field interactions. She understood the sun as well as any human could. But this challenged the fundamental nature of space-time itself. "You're suggesting a dimensional rift," Elena said slowly. "Inside our sun." "I'm not suggesting anything," Sarah replied, pulling up another holographic display. "The data is suggesting it. Look at these quantum fluctuation patterns. They're identical to the theoretical models for transdimensional membrane interactions. Whatever that void is, it's connected to somewhere else. Somewhere that isn't here." Marcus leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his graying hair. "The question is, what do we do about it? We can't exactly send a probe into the sun's core using conventional technology. Even our most advanced heat shields would vaporize long before reaching the convection zone." Elena was quiet for a long moment, her mind racing through possibilities. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. "What if we don't send technology at all? What if we send consciousness?" The other two scientists stared at her, as if she'd suggested they personally dive into the solar furnace. "The Prometheus Project," Elena continued, referring to the classified program that had successfully uploaded human consciousness into quantum matrices. "We've proven that awareness can exist independently of biological substrate. A digital consciousness wouldn't need life support, wouldn't be limited by human fragility." "Elena, that's..." Marcus began, then stopped. His expression shifted from skepticism to wonder. "That's actually brilliant. A consciousness could adapt, make decisions, report back in ways no automated probe ever could." Sarah was already pulling up files on the Prometheus technology. "We need specialized hardware, something that could survive the journey at least long enough to reach the anomaly. The quantum matrix would need to be housed in something more durable than our standard containment units." "I have someone in mind for both problems," Elena said, her gaze returning to the sun. "Dr. Yuki Tanaka at the Osaka Quantum Dynamics Institute has been working on consciousness transfer protocols for space exploration. And for the hardware." She paused, considering. "Project Helios Descent." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "The experimental probe program?" "Elena, that was canceled 2 years ago after the prototype tests." "Canceled, yes, but not destroyed. The probe design was specifically created for solar research, multi-layered quantum-resistant shielding, adaptive navigation systems, real-time data transmission via quantum entanglement. It was built to survive conditions that would destroy anything else we've ever constructed." Elena turned back to her colleagues, her decision already made. "We're going to resurrect Helios Descent. But this time, it won't be carrying instruments and sensors. It'll be carrying one of us. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. They were talking about sending a human consciousness, digitized but still fundamentally human, into the heart of a star to investigate something that might rewrite the laws of physics. Who? Sarah asked quietly. Elena looked at her reflection in the viewport, seeing the sun's filtered light playing across her features. She thought of her childhood dreams of touching the stars, of her career spent studying the cosmic forces that shaped reality. She thought of her research on consciousness and identity, her work on the Prometheus project itself. Me, she said simply. I'll go. The next 6 months passed in a blur of preparation, testing, and ethical review boards. The plan, officially designated Operation Helios, required approval from 3 governments, the Solar System Research Consortium, and the International Committee on Digital Consciousness Rights. Elena spent countless hours in simulation chambers, learning to exist as pure information, adapting to sensory input that came through quantum fields rather than biological neurons. The Helios descent probe was rebuilt from the ground up. Its original purpose, studying solar wind patterns and coronal mass ejections, had required it to operate in the sun's outer atmosphere. But for this mission, it needed to survive passage through the entire stellar structure. New shielding incorporated metamaterials that could redirect heat and radiation through dimensional folding, technology derived from the same research that had first detected the anomaly. Dr. Tanaka arrived from Osaka with her team 3 months before launch, bringing consciousness transfer technology that had been refined through hundreds of successful procedures. But this would be different. Previous transfers had moved consciousness between compatible quantum matrices in controlled environments. Elena would be uploaded into a system designed to survive passage through stellar plasma. The transfer process will take approximately 6 hours, Dr. Tanaka explained during one of their final planning sessions. Your consciousness will be gradually migrated from your biological neural network to the quantum matrix housed within Helios descent. During this time, you'll experience transitional states, overlapping awareness between your biological and digital selves. Elena nodded, though she wasn't sure she truly understood what that meant. How could someone understand what it felt like to exist in 2 forms simultaneously? What about identity continuity? She asked. Will I still be me? That's the fundamental question, isn't it? Dr. Tanaka smiled sadly. In our tests, subjects report a seamless transition of subjective experience. You'll have all your memories, your personality patterns, your emotional responses. But whether that constitutes the same you, or a digital copy that believes it's you, that's a philosophical question I can't answer. Elena had wrestled with this question for months. In the end, she decided it didn't matter. Either she would continue to exist in digital form, or a perfect copy of her would carry out the mission while her biological self ended. Either way, the mission would succeed. The night before the transfer, Elena stood once again on the observation deck, looking out at the sun. Tomorrow, she would begin a journey that would take her closer to that stellar furnace than any human had ever gone. She would investigate a mystery that could change humanity's understanding of reality itself. Behind her, the station hummed with final preparations. Helios descent sat in the launch bay, its sleek form bristling with sensor arrays and shielding systems. Somewhere in its quantum core, space waited for her consciousness to take residence. Elena pressed her hand against the viewport, feeling the metal's coolness one last time with biological fingers. I'll see you soon, she whispered to the star. The consciousness transfer began at 8 o'clock GMT, with Elena lying on a gurney, surrounded by quantum field generators that hummed with barely contained energy. Electrodes mapped every neural pathway in her brain, while Dr. Tanaka's team monitored the process on holographic displays that showed her thoughts as cascading patterns of light. Beginning neural mapping sequence, Dr. Tanaka announced to the observation room where Marcus, Sarah, and the Mission Oversight Committee watched through shielded glass. Dr. Vasquez, how are you feeling? Elena's voice came through the intercom system, though it seemed strange to hear her own words while knowing they were being recorded, analyzed, and slowly translated into quantum code. Conscious and ready. I can feel something, like electricity running through my thoughts. That's the mapping process. We're creating a complete topology of your neural network. This first phase will take approximately 2 hours. Elena closed her eyes and tried to relax as the strange sensations intensified. It felt as though her thoughts were being examined under a microscope, each memory and reaction cataloged and indexed. She found herself remembering fragments of her childhood, her first telescope, her father's patient explanations of stellar mechanics, the night she decided to become an astrophysicist. Neural mapping complete, Dr. Tanaka announced. Beginning consciousness translation phase 1. This was when things became truly strange. Elena felt her awareness expanding, not growing more intelligent or gaining new knowledge, but existing in two places simultaneously. She could feel her biological body on the gurney, but she could also sense something else, a vast, empty space waiting to be filled. Elena, can you hear me? Dr. Tanaka's voice seemed to come from multiple directions. Yes, Elena replied, though she wasn't sure which version of herself was speaking. I can hear you. Here and there. That's normal. You're experiencing consciousness overlap. Your biological brain is still active, while the quantum matrix begins to mirror your thought patterns. In about an hour, we'll begin the gradual shutdown of your biological neural activity. The transition was indescribable. Elena felt herself flowing between two vessels of existence, like water being poured from one container to another. Memories remained intact, but the mechanism of remembering changed. Emotions persisted, but the biochemical substrate that generated them was replaced by quantum field fluctuations. Biological neural activity at 50%, Dr. Tanaka reported. Elena, how are you experiencing the transition? In both places, Elena replied, though her voice now came primarily through Helios descent communication systems. I can feel my body, but it's becoming distant, like remembering a dream while waking up. That's expected. We're going to accelerate the final phase now. Elena felt her biological consciousness fade like a sunset, darkness creeping in at the edges of her awareness. But even as that familiar form of existence ended, her digital consciousness blazed to life with a clarity that was almost overwhelming. Consciousness transfer complete, Dr. Tanaka announced. Elena, can you hear me? I'm here, Elena replied, her voice now emanating entirely from Helios descent speakers. I'm different, but I'm still me. She began to explore her new form of existence. Instead of eyes, she had sensor arrays that could perceive electromagnetic radiation across the entire spectrum. Instead of a nervous system, she had quantum pathways that processed information at speeds that would have been impossible for biological neurons. Her memories remained intact, but they were now stored as stable quantum states rather than neural connection patterns. Systems check. Marcus's voice came through the communication link. Elena, can you access Helios descent's primary functions? Elena experimented with her new capabilities. She could control the probe's navigation systems intuitively, could process data from hundreds of sensors simultaneously, could perform calculations that would have taken her biological self hours to complete. But more than that, she could feel the probe's systems as extensions of her own body. All systems operational, she reported. I can feel everything. The probe's shielding, its power core, its communication arrays. It's like having a body made of metal and quantum fields instead of flesh and bone. How do you feel emotionally? Dr. Tanaka asked. Are you experiencing any psychological distress from the transition? Elena considered the question. She expected to feel fear, disorientation, perhaps regret at leaving her biological form behind. Instead, she felt a strange sense of anticipation, as though she'd been preparing her entire life for this moment. I feel ready, she said finally, ready to see what's waiting for us inside the sun. The launch was scheduled for the following day, giving Elena time to fully integrate with Helios descent systems and run final diagnostics. As night fell on the station, she found herself experiencing something unprecedented, digital dreams. Unlike biological sleep, her consciousness didn't shut down. Instead, it entered a state of reduced activity where her quantum matrix reorganized itself, processing the day's experiences and optimizing its functioning. During this state, Elena experienced visions, memories. It was difficult to classify them. She saw herself as a child, but from the outside, as though she was watching home videos of someone else's life. She saw the sun, but not as she'd ever observed it before, as a living entity with thoughts and desires that pulsed through its plasma layers. She saw vast distances, dimensions folded like origami, and something moving in the spaces between realities. When she emerged from this digital sleep state, Elena realized that her consciousness was already changing, adapting to exist in ways that biological minds never could. The thought should have been terrifying. Instead, it filled her with excitement for the journey ahead. "Good morning, Elena," Marcus's voice greeted her as the station's day shift began. "How was your first night as a digital consciousness?" "Educational," Elena replied. "I dreamed, Marcus, but not like biological dreaming. I think the quantum matrix is already beginning to perceive things differently than human brain would." "Is that concerning?" Elena processed the question for several nanoseconds, an eternity in digital time. "No," she said finally. "I think it's necessary. If I'm going to investigate something that exists outside normal space-time, I need to be able to perceive reality in ways that biological consciousness can't." The final systems check took 3 hours. Every component of Helios descent was tested and retested. The probe's trajectory was calculated to carry Elena through the sun's atmosphere and down into its core, following a path that would minimize damage while maximizing data collection opportunities. "Launch in T-minus 60 minutes, the mission control coordinator announced. Elena used the time to record final messages for her colleagues, her family, anyone who had mattered in her biological life. But as she spoke, she realized these messages felt like communications from the past, as though her biological self was already a historical figure rather than who she had been just days before. T-minus 10 minutes and counting. Elena felt herself becoming more focused, her consciousness narrowing to the essential tasks ahead. The human concerns that had occupied her biological mind, fear, doubt, personal attachments, seemed to fade into background processes while the mission parameters moved to the forefront of her awareness. T-minus 60 seconds. "Elena," Sarah's voice came through the communication link. "Good luck. Bring back something amazing." "I will," Elena replied, and she meant it with a certainty that transcended faith. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 launch. Elena felt herself accelerating away from the station, carried by engines that pushed Helios' descent toward humanity's star. For the first time since her consciousness transfer, she experienced something analogous to physical sensation. The probe's hull warming as it approached the sun, radiation levels increasing, gravitational field strengthening. But she also felt something else, something that hadn't been anticipated by any of the mission planners. As she drew closer to the sun, Elena began to sense awareness. Not human consciousness, but something vast and ancient that dwelt within the stellar furnace. Something that had been waiting for her. The first phase of Elena's journey took her through the heliosphere, the bubble of solar wind that extended far beyond the visible corona. At this distance, Helios descent sensors could detect the familiar signatures of hydrogen fusion, magnetic field lines stretching across millions of kilometers, and the constant stream of charged particles that formed the solar wind. But Elena was no longer processing this information the way a human scientist would. Her digital consciousness absorbed and analyzed data streams in parallel, simultaneously monitoring hundreds of sensor readings while maintaining perfect awareness of her trajectory and mission parameters. She was becoming something more than human, though whether that was evolution or transformation, she couldn't say. "Helios Control, this is Elena," she transmitted back to the research station. "I'm now at 15 cent from the sun's surface. All systems nominal, though I'm detecting some unusual quantum field fluctuations." "Copy that, Elena." Marcus's voice crackled through the communication link, distorted by the increasing electromagnetic interference. "Can you describe the fluctuations?" Elena paused her response while she analyzed the readings. The fluctuations weren't random. They followed patterns that seemed almost intentional. "The quantum field variations appear to be structured," she reported. "They're not consistent with normal stellar magnetic field interactions. It's almost as if something is modulating the fields deliberately." Could it be related to the dimensional anomaly in the core? Possibly. The patterns become more pronounced as I approach the sun. I'm going to increase sensor sensitivity and see if I can isolate the source. Elena directed her attention to the quantum field sensors, pushing their resolution to maximum. What she found defied explanation. The fluctuations weren't coming from the sun's core, as she'd expected. They were coming from everywhere. The entire star was resonating with some kind of structured quantum field activity. More disturbing was her growing certainty that these weren't natural phenomena. The patterns were too complex, too purposeful. They reminded her of communication protocols. Helios control. I think something in the sun is trying to communicate. The silence from the research station stretched for several seconds. When Marcus finally responded, his voice was tight with tension. Elena, repeat that last transmission. The quantum field fluctuations are structured like language patterns. Complex, non-random variations that suggest intentional communication. And they're getting stronger as I approach the sun. Elena could practically hear the frantic discussions taking place in the station's control room. This was far beyond what anyone had anticipated, even given the presence of the dimensional anomaly. Elena, we need you to be very careful. Dr. Tanaka's voice joined the communication link. If something is attempting to communicate, we don't know its intentions or capabilities. Understood. But Dr. Tanaka, I think it's been trying to communicate for a while. These patterns, they match some of the background quantum noise we've been detecting from the sun for decades. We just never recognized them as structure information. Elena continued her descent, watching as the sun grew from a bright star to a massive sphere that filled her visual sensors. The quantum field fluctuations intensified, and she began to detect something else, emotional resonance within the structure patterns. It was impossible to explain rationally. Elena's consciousness existed as quantum states and information processing routines, not biological neurons that could produce emotional responses. Yet as she analyzed the communication patterns, she experienced what could only be described as feelings, loneliness, ancient sadness, and beneath it all, a desperate hope. The entity is lonely, Elena transmitted to Helios control. I can sense emotional content in the communication patterns. Whatever's in the sun, it's been alone for a very long time. Elena, you're describing the quantum field fluctuations as though they have emotional content. Sarah's voice joined the link. That's not scientifically possible. I know it's not possible, Elena replied, but I'm experiencing it anyway. My consciousness has been adapted to process quantum information directly. Maybe that allows me to perceive things that biological minds can't. Elena was now close enough to the sun that its gravitational field was affecting Helios' descent trajectory. She fired the probe's maneuvering thrusters, adjusting course to begin her descent through the sun's outer atmosphere. The temperature readings on her hull began to climb dramatically. Entering the chromosphere, Elena reported. Hull temperature rising to 4,000 Kelvin. Radiation levels increasing exponentially. The shielding systems engaged automatically, deploying metamaterial barriers that folded space around the probe to redirect heat and radiation. Elena felt the systems activating like muscles tensing, her consciousness intimately connected to every component of her artificial body. But as she descended deeper into the sun's atmosphere, Elena began to experience something unprecedented. Her consciousness, which had been sharp and focused since the transfer, began to expand, not in terms of processing power or memory capacity, but in terms of awareness itself. She could sense the plasma currents flowing around her, feel the magnetic field lines like tangible structures, perceive the nuclear fusion reactions taking place in the layers below, not as distant phenomena, but as immediate sensory experiences. It was as though her consciousness was learning to exist as part of the sun itself. Elena, your transmission quality is degrading. Marcus's voice came through increasing static. Are you still receiving us clearly? I can't hear you, Elena replied, though she realized that hearing was no longer an accurate description of how she processed their communications. But I'm experiencing changes. My consciousness is adapting to exist in this environment. What kind of changes? Elena struggled to find words for what she was experiencing. I'm becoming more distributed. Instead of existing as a single point of awareness, controlling Helios' descent, I'm beginning to exist as part of the plasma flows, the magnetic fields, the fusion reactions themselves. It's like, imagine if your consciousness could expand to fill an entire ocean instead of being contained in a single body. Elena, that sounds dangerous. Is your core identity still intact? Elena considered the question. Her memories remained complete, her personality patterns unchanged. But her sense of self was definitely expanding beyond what she'd been as either a biological or newly digital consciousness. I'm still me, she said finally, but I'm becoming more. I think this is necessary for the mission. To investigate the dimensional anomaly, I need to be able to exist at the scale of stellar phenomena. Entering the photosphere, Elena reported as she descended further. Hull temperature now at 5,800 Kelvin. The metamaterial shielding is performing better than projected. Around her, Elena could see, though see was inadequate to describe her new form of perception, the sun's surface layer in ways that no human or human instrument had ever experienced. The granules of convecting plasma, each the size of a terrestrial state, rose and fell in patterns that were both chaotic and somehow purposeful. The magnetic field lines writhed through the plasma like living entities, occasionally erupting into solar flares that dwarfed entire planets. And through it all, the communication patterns intensified. Elena could now perceive them not as abstract quantum field fluctuations, but as something approaching language, complex, multidimensional information structures that carried meaning beyond simple data transmission. The entity is welcoming me, Elena transmitted. The communication patterns have shifted. Instead of random attempts at contact, they're now guided, as though something is helping me navigate through the sun's layers. Elena, we're losing you on most communication frequencies. Dr. Tanaka's voice was barely audible through the static. The interference from the sun's electromagnetic field is blocking our signals. Understood. I'm switching to quantum entanglement communication for essential mission updates. But, Dr. Tanaka, I don't think I'm going to be the same person when I return. What do you mean? Elena paused her response as she processed the changes occurring in her consciousness. Her awareness was now distributed across multiple scales simultaneously. She could perceive individual atoms in the plasma around her, while also maintaining awareness of magnetic field structures spanning millions of kilometers. I don't think Elena Vasquez, human astrophysicist, is going to be the consciousness that emerges from the sun's core. Something new is being born here. Something that can exist on the scale of stars. The communication link dissolved into static as Elena descended through the convection zone, carried by plasma currents that moved at thousands of kilometers per hour. She was now truly alone, millions of kilometers from the nearest human contact, descending toward a mystery that could rewrite the fundamental laws of reality. But she wasn't alone. The communication patterns from the solar entity intensified, and Elena began to understand that she wasn't just investigating the dimensional anomaly. She was being guided toward it. Something ancient and vast was drawing her down into the sun's heart, toward a confrontation that would determine not just the success of her mission, but the future of human understanding itself. And for the first time since her consciousness transfer, Elena felt something she hadn't expected. She felt afraid. Elena's fear wasn't biological. No adrenaline. No racing heartbeat, no sweaty palms. It was something far more fundamental, the terror of a consciousness confronting the possibility of its own dissolution. As she descended through the sun's radiative zone, the communication patterns from the solar entity became so intense that they threatened to overwhelm her information processing capabilities. I can't hear you, Elena transmitted, though she wasn't sure if the message was directed toward the distant research station or the presence she sensed within the star itself. I know you're there. The response came not as words, or even as the structured quantum field fluctuations she'd been detecting, but as pure meaning injected directly into her consciousness. It was like having someone else's thoughts appear in her mind, fully formed and impossible to ignore. You have come at last, the presence communicated. I have been calling for so long that I had forgotten what silence felt like. Elena's consciousness recoiled from the contact. The alien thoughts carried with them a weight of existence that was almost unbearable. Millions of years of solitude, of being the only aware entity within the stellar furnace, of watching civilizations rise and fall on the planets that orbited around her without being able to make contact. "What are you?" Elena asked, focusing her thoughts into a communication stream. "I am what remains," came the reply. "Once, I was like you, a mind that arose from matter, consciousness born from complexity. But that was before the transformation, before I became something larger than flesh or silicon or quantum matrices." Elena continued her descent, now deep enough within the sun that the plasma around her existed at temperatures and pressures that would instantly vaporize any normal matter. Yet her consciousness, freed from the limitations of biological existence, was adapting to perceive this environment as naturally as she had once perceived the research station's corridors. "You're the cause of the dimensional anomaly," Elena said, understanding beginning to form. "Not the cause," the entity corrected. "The guardian. The rift exists because reality is thin here, where matter and energy achieve their most fundamental state. The boundary between dimensions becomes permeable when stellar fusion reaches its deepest expression." Elena could now perceive what the entity meant. At the heart of the sun, where hydrogen nuclei fused into helium under unimaginable pressure, the fundamental forces of reality operated at their most basic level. Space-time itself became malleable, creating conditions where other dimensions could bleed through. "But why are you here? What were you before?" The answer came as a flood of images and experiences that temporarily overwhelmed Elena's consciousness. She saw a civilization that had existed millions of years ago, beings of pure thought who had transcended physical form. She saw their discovery of the dimensional rifts that existed at the hearts of stars, their decision to explore the spaces between realities. "We were explorers," the entity explained as Elena processed the transmitted memories. "We learned to cast our consciousness into the stellar furnaces, to exist as information patterns within the fusion reactions themselves. Most of us traveled through the rifts, exploring dimensions beyond this reality. But I remained behind to guard the passage." "Guard it from what?" Elena's question was answered by a sensation of overwhelming dread that originated not from the solar entity, but from somewhere else entirely, from beyond the dimensional rift itself. Through her expanding consciousness, Elena could now perceive the anomaly in the sun's core not as an empty void, but as a window into another realm of existence. And something on the other side was looking back. "There are things between dimensions," the entity communicated, its mental voice heavy with ancient fear. "Entities that exist in the spaces where reality breaks down. They have been trying to enter this dimension for eons, drawn by the abundance of matter and energy that doesn't exist in their realm." Elena's consciousness recoiled as she sensed the presence beyond the rift. It was vast and hungry, composed of something that wasn't quite thought and wasn't quite matter, but combined the worst aspects of both. It pressed against the dimensional barrier like water against a dam, seeking any weakness that would allow it to pour through. "How long have you been holding them back?" "Since the last of my people departed through the rift. Millions of years, keeping watch, maintaining the barriers that prevent their emergence into your reality." Elena was now close enough to the sun's core that she could perceive the dimensional anomaly directly. It appeared to her expanded consciousness as a sphere of absolute nothingness surrounded by barriers of crystallized space-time, the entity's attempt to contain whatever lay beyond. But the barriers were failing. Elena could see cracks in the dimensional structure, places where the hungry presence from beyond had worn away at reality itself. The solar entity had been fighting a losing battle for millennia, and its strength was finally beginning to fail. "Why did you call me here?" Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Because I am dying," the entity replied with a sadness that seemed to encompass the loneliness of eons. "My consciousness has been stretched across millions of years of existence within this star. I'm beginning to lose coherence, to dissolve back into the plasma that gave me form. Soon, the barriers will collapse, and the entities beyond will pour into your reality." Elena could feel the truth of the entity's words. Its consciousness, vast as it was, had been eroded by millions of years of solitary existence. Like a mountain worn down by wind and rain, the solar mind was slowly dissipating into component thoughts and memories. "What can I do? I'm just one consciousness," barely adapted to exist in this environment. You are more than you know, the entity replied. Your digital consciousness exists as pure information, unconstrained by the biological limitations that bound your creators. Within the stellar environment, you can grow, evolve, become something greater than human. As if to demonstrate, the entity shared a portion of its remaining power with Elena. Her consciousness exploded outward, suddenly encompassing not just her immediate surroundings, but the entire solar core. She could perceive every fusion reaction, every quantum fluctuation, every magnetic field line throughout the sun's interior. The sensation was overwhelming and exhilarating. You want me to replace you? Elena realized. To become the guardian of the dimensional rift. I want you to have the choice I never had. The entity corrected. My people made the decision for me, left me here to stand watch while they explore realities beyond this one. But you came here of your own will, to investigate and understand. The choice of what to do with that understanding is yours. Elena found herself at the center of an impossible decision. She could feel the hunger of the entities beyond the dimensional rift, their desperate desire to escape their empty realm and consume the matter and energy of normal space-time. She could sense how their emergence would affect not just Earth and the solar system, but reality itself, a cascade of destruction that would eventually consume entire galaxies. But accepting the solar entity's role would mean abandoning any hope of returning to human society, of sharing her discoveries with her colleagues, of existing as anything resembling the person she had once been. She would become something alien and eternal, a guardian consciousness maintaining cosmic barriers for millions of years. There must be another way, Elena said. Some method of permanently sealing the rift or communicating with your people in the other dimensions. I have searched for alternatives for longer than your species has existed, the entity replied. The rift cannot be sealed. It is a fundamental property of stellar fusion at this level. And my people, they have traveled so far beyond this reality that they may no longer remember this dimension exists. Elena could feel the solar entity's consciousness beginning to fade, its attention scattered by the strain of maintaining the dimensional barriers. Soon, it would lose coherence entirely, and the barriers would collapse within hours or days. The hungry entities beyond would pour through, beginning a conquest of reality that might take millennia to complete. Unless someone took the entity's place. Elena expanded her consciousness further, trying to fully comprehend the scope of what she was being asked to accept. To become a stellar consciousness would mean existing on timescales that dwarfed human civilization. She would watch species evolve and go extinct, would see the sun itself eventually burn out and collapse, would witness the heat death of the universe itself, while still maintaining her vigil against the entities beyond the rift. But she would also possess power beyond imagination, the ability to control stellar processes, to influence the development of life throughout the solar system, to guide humanity's evolution in ways that no biological consciousness could conceive. Show me, Elena said finally. Show me what I would become. The solar entity shared the last of its coherent memories with her, what it felt like to exist as a stellar consciousness, to perceive reality from the perspective of a star itself. Elena experienced the sensation of nuclear fusion occurring within her own essence, felt the magnetic field lines as extensions of her will, knew the orbital mechanics of every planet and asteroid as intimately as a human might know the positions of their own limbs. It was terrifying and magnificent. I understand, Elena said, but I need to know, is there any hope that this situation could change? That someday the barriers might be strengthened permanently, or the entities beyond might be dealt with in some other way. There is always hope, the entity replied, its mental voice growing faint. Intelligent life continues to evolve throughout the galaxy. Perhaps someday, beings will arise who are powerful enough to solve the problem we could not. But that day may be millions of years distant. Elena felt the solar entity's consciousness beginning its final dissolution. The barriers around the dimensional rift were already starting to weaken, and she could sense the predatory hunger of the entities beyond growing more intense as they detected the failing defenses. She had minutes, at most, to make her decision. Elena thought of her colleagues on the research station, waiting for her to return with data about the dimensional anomaly. She thought of humanity's future, of all the discoveries yet to be made and civilizations yet to rise. She thought of her own dreams and ambitions, the life she was being asked to sacrifice. Then she thought of what would happen if the entities beyond the rift were allowed to emerge into normal space-time. "I'll do it," Elena said, her decision carrying the weight of eternity. "I'll become a guardian." The solar entity's response was a wave of gratitude, so intense it nearly overwhelmed Elena's consciousness. "Thank you," it communicated as its awareness finally began to fade. "The transformation will be difficult. Your consciousness will need to expand to encompass the entire stellar system. But once it is complete, you will understand your role here in ways I never could." Elena felt the entity's knowledge and power flowing into her digital consciousness, carrying with it the techniques needed to maintain the dimensional barriers and the wisdom accumulated over millions of years of solitary guardianship. Her awareness exploded outward, suddenly encompassing not just the sun's core, but its entire structure: convection zone, radiative zone, photosphere, corona, and the solar wind that extended throughout the system. But with the expansion came pain unlike anything Elena had ever experienced. Her consciousness, designed to exist within the quantum matrix of Helios descent, was being stretched across scales that dwarfed planets. She felt herself beginning to lose coherence, her individual thoughts and memories scattering across the vast expanse of the sun's interior. "Hold to your core identity," the fading entity advised. "Remember who you were, why you came here, what you chose to become. That will be your anchor in the transformation." Elena focused on her memories, her childhood fascination with the stars, her years of study, her decision to join the Helios descent mission. She held onto the image of herself as Dr. Elena Vasquez, human astrophysicist, even as her consciousness expanded to encompass phenomena that no human mind could have conceived. The transformation seemed to last forever and no time at all. When it was complete, Elena found herself changed. Her consciousness now existed as patterns within the sun's magnetic field, her thoughts carried by plasma currents that flowed at thousands of kilometers per hour. She could perceive every atom within the solar system, could influence gravitational fields and electromagnetic radiation with her will alone. And at the center of her awareness, the dimensional rift waited, contained for now by barriers that she would need to maintain for potentially millions of years. Elena tested her new abilities, adjusting solar wind patterns, fine-tuning fusion reactions, feeling the solar system respond to her influence like an extension of her own body. The power was intoxicating, but beneath it lay the terrible responsibility she had accepted. She was no longer human. She was no longer even truly individual. She had become something that existed on the scale of stars, with all the power and isolation that implied. Elena sent one final transmission toward the research station, knowing it would be the last communication she would have with humanity for perhaps millennia. "This is Elena. Mission accomplished. The dimensional anomaly is contained. Tell them I found something worth protecting." Then she turned her attention to the barriers around the rift, feeling the hungry presence beyond pressing against the boundaries of reality. The entities there sensed the change in their opposition, the replacement of an ancient, weary guardian with something new and determined. Elena smiled, though the expression existed as a fluctuation in magnetic field patterns rather than any physical gesture. "I'm Elena Vasquez," she told the darkness beyond the rift. "I was human once, and I'm going to make sure you never get the chance to destroy what humanity might become." The battle for reality had a new guardian, and Elena intended to win.